Hi, everyone. I'm Shalini, and I have the pleasure of telling you about our first keynote speaker. So Dame Inga Beale worked nearly 4 decades in the world of financial services, culminating in the role of CEO of the centuries-old financial institution, Lloyd's of London, from 2014 to 2018. Understanding the vital importance of inclusion in the workplace and having done much to break down barriers and build inclusive environments, she's keen for organizations to do more than throw money at diversity and inclusion. As a champion for women and for the LGBTQ+ community, she calls for organizations to take real action and implement initiatives that will have a positive, long-lasting impact on the lives of others. So if you all could please join me in welcoming Dame Inga Beale to the stage.
Well, thank you, Shalini, and great to be here again, everyone. I know probably none of you were here when I last spoke at this conference, but anyway, for me, it's great to be back. Although it was in a different venue last time, it wasn't at the London Business School. But anyway, here we are. I know, welcome all of you online. Hopefully the video's working and all the sound's working excellently, so it can be a really, really inclusive event you're having for a couple of days. And I would also just like to say how impressed I've been with the professionalism. When I've worked in the world of finance, there's lots of money in that world. I've come here you are on the side of what you've been studying. You've been put together an amazing conference. I mean, well done. It's absolutely brilliant. And thank you for including me. I'm going to spend a little while talking a bit about me. Actually, that's great. You know, I can talk a bit about me. But also, I'm going to talk also about the world of business and some of the experiences I've had in business, sort of driving the inclusion agenda. But I'm also going to talk on the personal side about all the different identities I've had, if you like, throughout my career, and how they've all shaped me, and they've actually been so important to me that they've made me change my ideas about work and strategy. And I think that's a really important thing that sometimes we don't focus enough on, that as people, we contribute to work in the way that, you know, that we've been shaped, if we allow ourselves, right? Because not all of us are so good at actually allowing ourselves to let all of that stuff that we've learned and experienced over the years come through in the workplace. So I'm going to touch a little bit on that as well. Now, how many times have any of you felt that you didn't belong somewhere? And I talk quite a lot about how this feels. How often were you, or are you, in a situation where you felt like the different one, the odd one out? Well, funny enough, that started quite early on in my life. It's only now that I can really look back and reflect on it, but it was when I was a little girl. And I grew up actually in a very happy family in a town 90 kilometers west of London, Newbury, not a very big town. I was one of 3 siblings, and I was the middle one. So yeah, maybe I would have some problems because I was the middle child. But fundamentally, I was born looking like different to my brother and sister. My brother and sister had what everyone expected, because my mother was from Norway and they expect you all to be born with white blonde hair, and my brother and sister were. However, I was born with dark brown hair. Now, I know I'm gray these days, but then I assure you I had dark brown hair. My brother and sister told me I was adopted. And they became the biggest buddies. And I was this girl in the middle, feeling completely different, completely the other one. And so I grew very, very independent. 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. I was always on my own when my brother and sister were playing happily somewhere else. Now, that helped shape my career to a certain extent, because it gave me an amazing independence, an independent streak that I was never afraid to be doing things on my own. But the negative side to that was that actually I grew very angry. And by the time I was 7, my mother tells me I walked into the kitchen and I said to her, I said, I am never marrying an Englishman. My father was English. And I am never having children. I told her when I was 7 years old, because something in me was so angry about being born, and I was actually angry with my parents, in my view, for being so selfish for bringing me into the world. It was for them that they brought me in. It wasn't for me. And it was incredible how that stayed with me for many, 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 many years, right the way through into when I started working in the world of insurance. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that sort of anger that had been building up manifested itself. So I mention this because when we think about how people feel included or not, we often think about some very, I don't know, physical attributes, or we talk about the LGBTQ plus community and all of that. But there are all sorts of other ways to feel different and not included. And many of them, we might not even realize at the time what's happening to us. And we might not realize at the time what we're doing to other people by making them feel not included. Now, so I did get through, I didn't actually ever finish my university studies. Again, I was this sort of angry, rebellious person. In fact, I didn't even stay at the school to finish my A-levels, as they were in those days, when I was 17, 18. And the reason I didn't do that is because the headmaster came up to me and he said, "Oh, Inga, you're not really behaving very well, you know, and unless you buck your ideas up, we're not going to let you stay on at the school." So what did I do? I said, "Well, stuff you." And off I went. Anyone who gives a challenge to me like that, that's how I respond. So actually, I finished my education at 18 at a local technical college. Then I did come to London to start uni. Within one term, the first semester, I thought, I hate this. I was studying accountancy, so maybe some of you would say, well, I'm not surprised. But anyway, and I left within the first term. I thought this is just awful, but at least I was in London. I was in London. The bright lights of the city were attracting me. And this is where I wanted to be. And I so didn't want to go home. And even though I lived in a grotty, horrible little bedsit in North London with no heating, I was determined not to have to go back to my home in Newbury. So I thought, right, I've got to get a job. Got to get a job. I've got to survive. And I'll start another degree, you know, in the next academic year. This was what I was thinking. But actually, I started in the world of insurance. And suddenly there I was. I was in the heart of the financial district of the City of London. I was earning money. I started earning £3,600 a year. I remember it because the reason I started in insurance versus anything else, and there were lots of job opportunities then in the 80s, they were paying me £300 more a year. So I took that job. That was the way, that was how I ended up in insurance. The money, 300 quid a year. Anyway, so that's what I did. And I had suddenly all this money, and I was dealing in the really, the very interesting end of reinsurance. So we were looking at risks from all over the world doing insurance. It wasn't, you know, your sort of motor insurance, that sort of dull thing. It was really exciting. So I never went back to study, and that was it. And I did have a chip on my shoulder for many years, actually. So that was another thing that I sometimes felt like the odd one out. Right? I was the odd one out. I remember getting a new job, and the CEO of the company assumed I had a degree. And we had a business lunch in those days when you had business lunches. And they were talking about where people had gone to university. And this CEO, who hadn't directly hired me, asked me where I went to university. And I was dumbstruck. I mean, I actually, you know, I was made to feel so small. So all I'm saying is there are all these ways that people can feel excluded and different. And I've had many of those moments throughout my life. But anyway, I start work in the city in the 80s. And it's an incredibly male-dominated environment, incredibly. Now, I started as a trainee underwriter, and that means I was in the front line. I was negotiating. I was in a very commercial role. And the way the market works, that market right in the City of London, it's a face-to-face market. So you would sit in a big open plan environment, and the brokers, so those intermediaries, would walk in, no appointments, they would walk in, see who was free, come and sit at your desk, by the side of your desk, and negotiate deals. And that was how we did it. And remember, in those days, we didn't have computers. We didn't have all these fancy models and actuarial science. Well, it was developed, but we weren't really using it for what we did. Things got handed down to you. So there I was in this frontline role, and there were 35 underwriters, 34 men and me. And that was how I started. And so it was a very interesting start for me, because there I was yet again feeling like the very different one. But I had my savior at that time. I had sport. I was rowing a lot at the beginning, so I was more interested in getting down to the river in Chiswick in the west of London to get out on the water with my rowing crew. I was much more interested in doing that than doing my work. And then I started playing rugby, and I played rugby for Wasps for 12 years. And when I look back at it now, I realize how important that sport was for me in those first 8-9 years of my career. Because on the sports field, I felt I belonged. I was part of the team, and I didn't feel different. I felt valued for what I could contribute to the team. And I think it was my release valve, my support network outside of work that kept me coming into work every day, sort of confronting this thing that I was different. And so that was what worked for me. And often I would say that sport, of course, does that, right? It's very inclusive. And then we have to look at sport from an LGBTQ plus perspective, right? You know, the banter, the chants that go on the football field. I mean, I think you've got somebody coming from Brighton who's going to be talking to you later. The Brighton and Hove football team, the abuse that the fans and the players got. And this was not that long ago. This was, I think, the 2013-14 season, where the chants were, "You're from a town full of gays and we hope you all die of AIDS." That was chanted. And there was a whole review done of this, research done. They studied it. And do you know what? Do you know what the police said, most of the police? What the stewards said who were controlling the crowds? Oh, it's just a bit of banter. Banter, that word I've begun to absolutely hate. The number of women I've spoken to in the world of insurance who have decided to leave because of banter. It's an almost indescribable thing what goes on in the workplace. This idea that people are saying things in jest all the time. It's not to be tolerated anymore. And this can go against women, it can go against people from a different race, it can be against the LGBTQ plus community, it can be almost at any time. And in my mind, it's one of the most difficult things to crack in the workplace. Something that somebody else thinks is just funny and a bit of banter can be absolutely offensive to someone else who receives that comment. And I know we have all these people saying about, well, we have to be so PC these days and politically correct, and what the hell can we say? It is tough. It is really tough, but unless you start actually having proper, meaningful conversations with people about this, no one will understand why something is offensive to you. So this is something that I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer, but we've got to try and think about how we can do things differently. And then I was going quite well in my career, right? I was promoted. I was actually studying for insurance exams. I actually got qualified. I did my associate at the Chartered Insurance Institute, so I did that. But then something happened. And there was a sexist incident at work. And this is when the anger came out of me. And I was 27, I think, at the time. So I'd started work at 18, so that's how long I'd been working. And there was some cricket going on. I don't know any cricket fans in the room. Not sure how many of you are cricket fans. I'm not a cricket fan myself, but working in this team of 34 men and me, cricket was very popular. And so there were some cricket championships going on in the Caribbean at this time. And our manager, his wife was working for the Jamaican Tourist Board. So we thought we'll have a series of cocktail parties in the office to celebrate the cricket, and we'll decorate the office with all the posters from the Jamaican Tourist Board. Now, this is the late 80s, right? So you've got a woman in a bikini, then you've got a woman in a bikini with a wet t-shirt, then you've got a woman in a wet t-shirt. You know, that was the kind of imagery that was used to advertise tourism in those days. And actually, I'm pretty shocked still that some of the posters I see around these days. But anyway, that was definitely the only thing that was advertised in Jamaica. So these posters of these scantily clad women all around. Now, after the cricket championships were over, and remember, these championships can last many, 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 many days, probably weeks. The posters were still all up some weeks after, and I went to see my manager, and I was so proud because I plucked up the courage to go and see him. And I said, I really think I've been a good sport, but can I have the posters down, please? And he said, of course. How could we have been so insensitive, all these men? And so I went home very chuffed, very pleased with myself that I'd had the courage to speak out. And then I came in the next day to find all the posters wrapped around my desk, my workstation. And then I was angry. And then I walked out of the office. I didn't speak to anyone. I just walked straight out. I went home and I said, I'm never working in the City of London or the world of finance again. So that was it. This was my big explosion. Now, actually, of course, what happened, out of many of the darkest times, then the next thing comes along and the most fantastic opportunity. So I went traveling, I packed a rucksack, bought a round the world ticket, and off I went. I went traveling through India and other parts of Asia. After some months, I was in Sydney, Australia, and I needed a job. Because remember, I hadn't been saving for this trip. So I got a job at the BBC in Sydney, and there was my first female role model. And amazing, actually, because Australia in those days was a very chauvinistic place. They didn't even allow women to play rugby. They really didn't allow women to play rugby in those days. And I'd come from playing rugby here, and it was growing women's sport there, no. But I met my first female role model. The manager of the BBC in Sydney was a woman. And I was like, wow, this is the first senior woman I've been sort of exposed to. And she was so inspirational to me that I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back. I took a year to get back, but I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to the world of insurance, and I'm going to do it on my terms, and I'm going to be me. And she completely changed my life. And this is the thing about role models, that sometimes we don't understand the importance of them. Sometimes you can be one and you don't even know you're one, because people are watching you all the time. They're watching what you say, what you do, your expression. I got thrown out of my netball team when I was 10 years old because of the expression on my face. Because the teacher didn't think I was, she thought I was being sort of looking at her in a nasty way. I was 10 years old. So people watch these things all the time. And so just be very, very aware of how you're coming across to others, and be aware that you can be the most perfect role model for someone and not even know it. So she was my really first inspirational female. And hence, you know, I came back to insurance and ended up running one of the world's most well-known insurance brands. So there you go. You never know what will happen in your life. But then you also need to be very aware about, when you're in the world of work, that you don't fall into the trap of being biased. And I remember a time when I was a manager by this time. This is roll forward a bit. I was a manager, and I was running quite a good team of underwriters in London. And one day this broker came in, and most of the brokers are men. He came in and he said, oh, Inga, I've got the short straw today. I said, what do you mean you've got the short straw? He said, well, I've come to see the Spice Girls. I said, what? Don't know. Anyone know? Everyone know who the Spice Girls are? They were a very, very popular girl group in the 90s. I know they've had a little bit of a resurgence, but they were very popular. I said, the Spice Girls. He said, look, you've got 5 women. And of course I looked, I thought, how did that happen? Right? No, you say, of course I must have known. Do you know, I kind of didn't know. The men had left my team and I'd hired women. And there were so few women in the London insurance market, but here they all were working with me. And that was my first sort of eye-opening thing. No management training course had told me this. I had fallen into the trap of hiring people just like me, who I got on with. So I know full well how much effort it takes in the workplace to make sure that people don't do that, because I fell into that trap myself. So anyway, I've had this great career. I'm now progressing through the ranks, and then something else starts to happen in my life. So up in sort of in the 80s, I was thinking of myself as a heterosexual woman fighting in a man's world. That was sort of my life. And then I started to date women. And then I thought, oh, this is interesting. What do I do about this at work? And I decided, because I was working in this very, very male-dominated environment, I decided not to be out about my sexuality. And I then started to degender everything I said at work. You know, you somehow remove yourself from some of the office chit-chat. People then start to think of you as a bit distant, not very approachable, don't really know this person, and that's the sort of stuff that happens. And I was in the closet for many, many, many years. And so much so that I even got, with my company, I got moved to the US, and I moved, it was GE I was working for, and their insurance headquarters at that time were in Kansas City. So I wasn't going anywhere glamorous. But my girlfriend at the time, we were going there together, but I didn't want to tell my employer that I was out, or that I was lesbian. So she came in secret. And the only way she could come with me in those days, I mean, I lived, whether it was the Kansas state or whether it was Missouri, they didn't even recognize same-sex relationships. So there was no way I was going to be able to get her off, you know, in on the back of the relationship with me. So she had to go back to university. We got her a student visa. She went to university again to do another degree. And I did all of that in secret. Then the company moved me to France. Again, she was a secret, moved me to Germany. She was a secret. And all of the extra hassle that I went through, that she went through, that we went through, because I was too scared to come out at work. I look back now and I'm shocked and horrified, particularly when GE had back then in the 2000s, an LGBT network. GE was very, very advanced. Poor GE now, it's sort of all separating, isn't it? And I look back with some very happy memories of when I worked there, and it did some amazing things. But even though they had an LGBT network, I was still afraid to come out of the closet. So I lived for many years in the closet. And the only reason I came out was, and I remember this quite clearly, it was 2007. And I'd been the CEO of a Swiss company. I was in Zurich in Switzerland. We'd been subject to a hostile bid, hostile takeover, and we'd fought for months to prevent this hostile takeover happening. But we realized more and more, and I was working obviously very closely with the board, we realized that actually we were going to lose a vote because now they'd gained so much shareholder strength. So we had to give up and basically be bought by a French company. And the CEO of the French company asked me if I would like to be his deputy CEO. I said, no, I don't think so, thank you. So I decided to leave. And what happened during those months of fighting, you know, I was the CEO and I was having to be very, very strong, obviously, because you're the leader. All your people around the world are petrified about their jobs. They don't know what's going to happen. You don't know all the answers. And my team were running around nervous as hell. Even my direct reports, my group executive, they were also nervous. So I had to be incredibly strong and always be the one communicating. And I remembered my very, very first live TV interview. I think it was CNN coming in to interview me. And to prepare for that, we had some media training, and we decided the CFO, my chief financial officer, and me, we were going to have the training. By 11 o'clock on the day of the training, my CFO said, no, I'm not doing this thing, go over to you. So I thought, I've got to do this all on my own. So I did that. It was very, very, very stressful. And I was very much the center of attention. I was already the center of attention in Swiss media, because I was the first female CEO of a listed financial services company in the history of Switzerland. So I already had this sort of, again, this uniqueness. And so the media were always interested in what I or the company was doing, but this was an extreme scenario. So after we went through sold the company, I was then out. And one of my team decided not to stay either. And they invited me to dinner one Saturday in Zurich. And of course, I went on my own because I was in the closet. And they sat down and we had a chat at dinner and they said, I don't know how you managed to get through this time, Inga. How did you manage? You go home, who were you able to offload to, cry to? And it was that moment I thought, my goodness, all these people, not only have I been lying to them, now they're feeling sorry for me. They're feeling sorry for me because they thought I was on my own. And then I said at that dinner to myself anyway, I said, this is ending here. It's ending right now. And so then when I went for my next job interview, almost in the first 5 minutes, I blurted out, I'm in a lesbian relationship. And of course, the CEO, it was the CEO of Zurich Insurance Group, said, oh, he wasn't expecting it, but he said, oh, that's great. I hope I get to meet her one day. And then we went on for the interview and then I got the job and I thought, well, what have I been doing? So this is the kind of stuff that goes on. And we know from some of the stats and analysis that people can still go back into the closet. Even though they can be out in one environment, they can go somewhere else and go straight back in. And I know how much extra effort it sort of took. And I tell you, when I was out suddenly, I felt more energetic. I felt, I don't know, just better equipped to take on my job because I wasn't having to worry and hide anything. It didn't mean that necessarily everyone was open to have conversations with me. There was really only one of my direct reports at that time who would ever ask me how my girlfriend was. Most of the other people didn't really ask me, but at least they knew and I didn't have to hide anything. So, and I mean, okay, that was a few years ago now, but I do still think that the world of work hasn't necessarily moved that much further forward. So I do worry about it still. And when I arrived at Lloyd's, I remember being quite shocked because Lloyd's, I mean, maybe you're not that familiar with Lloyd's, but when I was approached to take over CEO, it was 325 years old, right? And they only allowed women into Lloyd's in the 1970s. So for nearly 300 years, it had been all male. So you can just imagine the culture of Lloyd's when it was there. And I arrived, and in that time, pre-pandemic, it was a physical marketplace, up to 8,000 people meeting every day in this physical trading room. So you could walk through it and you could see, really see the people working in the market. And I can remember because I've been living outside of the UK now for quite a few years, over 12 years. I was back to London, which is where I started. And I remember walking through Lloyd's, having taken over CEO, thinking, wow, there's not much diversity here, is there? And also strict dress code in Lloyd's meant all the men looked exactly the same in their suit and tie, and they weren't allowed to take their jackets off or their ties off at work. That was the strict dress code. So you can imagine this, thousands and thousands of people all looking identical, all white men, nearly all white men. And I thought, gosh. And I was hired to modernize Lloyd's, put in technology, and yet predecessors to me had tried this over decades and failed. And I thought, there's something to this. There's something to this homogenous blob of people who keep hiring clones or making them into clones and not moving forward and not adopting technology. So they were trading $40 billion of business every year on paper and wet ink stamps in 2013-14 when I started. So that nothing had changed. I thought there's something to do this. There is something about this homogenous group of people who don't want to change anything. No one wants to challenge anything. They're like a club, an impenetrable club. And I thought this has to be part of the reason why it hasn't modernized. So I started talking about it. And in those days, everything was physical. So I would be addressing hundreds of people in a big town hall meeting. And I would say, I don't know why. I said, I'm looking out in a sea of white faces. I said, I'm looking out and I see hardly any women in senior roles. I started using words like gay and lesbian and bisexual. And my goodness, they thought this was it. This was almost too much for the audience. Not only did they have this female, she was really freaky as well. She was using words that up until then had been completely taboo. completely taboo, unless you were being, you were uttering some banter. These were taboo words. Wow, heads bowed, sort of giggle. It was absolutely extraordinary. And I thought there's something to this. So I didn't hire a diversity and inclusion consultant when I started at Lloyd's. I just thought, this is so messed up. I've just got to keep talking about it. And that's what we did. That's what I did. I didn't stop, despite all the criticism. I kept going. And then employee resource groups started. And I think you probably, I saw some of the discussion in the book about ERGs. My goodness, these were some of my saviors, because I was driving things from the top, but the ERG started at grassroots, and people would come to me, can we have an ERG for this? Can we have any? I said, yes, go ahead. And so all these people were coming together, and they were addressing quite tricky topics. And I always remember our Pride at Lloyd's group, the LGBT network that we launched. And it was done in an evening. We had a few drinks. It was a real celebration. In fact, there was a woman from Stonewall. I didn't know she was from Stonewall, but she gave a speech. And I was looking at this woman thinking, wow, we've got somebody as bold as she is in the Lloyd's market. I was really shocked. And then I realized she was from Stonewall. Oh my God. For this moment, I was so happy. But anyway, we did have this amazing launch. And then one of the guys, and in Lloyd's, we have, full of tradition, we have these, and they are all men. I don't think even to date there's been a female one. We've had one black guy, because they were all white up until the point when I arrived, but they're called waiters. And they're like, if you've been in the Bank of England, they have waiters, and in the Bank of England, they wear little pink jackets, very nice. And in Lloyd's, they either wear the big red robes, or they wear these dark navy suits, uniforms, and they're called waiters. Anyway, one of these Lloyd's waiters came up to me. I was pretty amazed he was actually at this Pride at Lloyd's event. He came up to me, and he had a slight tear in his eye, and he said, Inga, I'm so amazed, thank you. I never thought I would see this day in Lloyd's. Now, he'd been probably at Lloyd's for over 30 years. And I thought, oh, my joy was welling up, and I was thinking, he's going to come out for the first time. He's coming out of the closet. He wasn't coming out of the closet about him. He was coming out of the closet about his son. And he said, his son was in his late 20s. He said, I've never been out about my son at work because I was fearful of some banter or judgment by my co-workers. So I had a lie about my son and his life. And now he was out and proud about his son. And I was really touched by that, and I will never forget that. And the other thing that I realize now, the importance of what you do in the workplace and how it can seep out, because now he's also out and proud in his personal life about his son. And that's an amazing thing to have happen. And I didn't realize any of this. I'm not an expert in this at all, but I've realized over all the years the impact we can have. And now more than ever, business, but it has a duty. But the society is expecting business to do the right thing, expecting CEOs to make sure they have an opinion on things. Previously, CEOs were, very corporate, and the corporate communications team managed everything, and it was all very managed. Society doesn't want that anymore. And in fact, I don't know whether you ever look at the Edelman Barometer of Trust. It's published every year. It's an amazing report, and it looks at the trust levels across the world. And it shows that actually beginning of pandemic, trust in governments actually went up. 6 months ago, that bubble burst, and suddenly governments are way down. People don't trust governments. Media has gone to its lowest ever trust level. Social media in the UK has a 19% trust level. It's incredible. But business globally, 61% trust level, higher than any government group, any media, any NGO. So society has seen and is kind of responding to what business has done during the pandemic. Somehow business has shown that it cares about its people. And suddenly there's this trust that business is going to do the right thing. So it's a great opportunity for people in the workplace to grab this, really do something different, because it will have far-reaching effects into society. And I remember after the Pride at Lloyd's group, we had a huge ally program, lots of allies, they're supporting us. And I remember one of the allies, because we issued all these rainbow lanyards, and one of my exec team left work, didn't take her badge off, her lanyard off, and was going to a friend's house. And she went to meet her friend after work with her rainbow lanyard on. Now, that evening, the daughter arrived. I think she was a teenager, 14, 15. She saw the rainbow lanyard. And she said, "What's that?" And my team member said, "Well, it's to support our Pride at Lloyd's group. It's to support the LGBT community." And she talked about it. At that point, the teenage girl broke down in tears and came out as lesbian to her mother, this woman. So again, it's a kind of thing, because this is all about people, right? There is science to a lot of this, of course there is. But fundamentally, to make change in the world, it needs people to be visible. It needs people to be outspoken. It needs people to have the courage to challenge the norm, to challenge the way things are, to challenge the status quo. And however small that act is, it can have an enormous impact on an individual. And that's why I'm keen still to try and make a difference in the world. And I can tell you, when I was at Lloyd's, after 1 year, my board, my chair came to me and he said, "Inga," he said, "you've got to stop talking about this D&I shit." I said, "Well, I'm not sure I'm going to do that." So I had to be quite smart about it, because I wasn't going to stop. And I got sort of allies. So I used to pick people to be the spokesperson instead of me. Because there's something about, if you're the person from a group talking on behalf of that group, somehow there's people sort of looking down at you. You know, they're not quite wanting to hear it. And I'll tell you this, I remember at Lloyd's, once we had a big event in Germany, and we used to have these big market events. So there were probably about 700 people gathered in a room. The UK ambassador for Germany opened up the speech, the proceedings, and he gave his speech. And he said, "Oh, this is, well, thank you for inviting me." But then he said, "This is amazing." He said, "I think you've got 97% men in this room. I think you need to work a little bit on your gender diversity," he said. I thought, "Oh, great, thanks." Anyway, I didn't know he was going to say it. And I don't think he expected to say it. It certainly wasn't in his script, but he was looking out again on the audience. Anyway, got up and did my speech. I didn't mention anything about diversity and inclusion, not a word. And then during the day, I went round and met people, talking 7 occasions. Somebody said to me, "Oh, Inga, well done for mentioning about the lack of diversity." That didn't come from my mouth. But people thought it did, even though it was the ambassador had said it. And that's why it can be so difficult sometimes to be the spokesperson for a group if you're part of it. And that's why, to me now, the importance of allies is growing enormously. And the fact that you can have somebody speaking up on your behalf, I think in the world of business, it's going to be the key to opening this up. It's going to be the key to it. And I realized, and we launched a whole diversity and inclusion festival, which started at Lloyd's in 2015. It's now gone completely global across the entire insurance sector this year. It takes place in September now every year. There were 35 countries participating, 145 different events across the world, over 30,000 people participating in them. So it's gone way beyond Lloyd's. But when we launched that, I thought, you know, it can't be me heading this up. So I chose from the Lloyd's market, a white heterosexual man who'd been married and had a couple of kids, because I thought he's going to meld in. He's just going to blend in with everyone. But importantly, he's going to be able to open doors and start conversations with people who may be a little resistant if I come along. And I had all sorts of hate mail. I had people calling for me to resign. Some people said, "You should go off and kill yourself, otherwise we will," and things like that. So there were people that were quite abusive. And I thought, I've got to make a change here. So I'm going to use other people to do this for me. They were all willing. So this guy was a totally willing person to do this. And he's still championing it today. He stayed in that role all the time. So 7th year of the festival, and he's still in charge. I'm so proud that he's still as committed as he was. But at least he could be that front person and take the pressure off of me, because it can be really tough. And then, of course, the other thing that happened when I arrived at Lloyd's was, well, not of course, but by then, life moves on, right? My girlfriend, we did get married of 12 years, she decided to leave me for a younger woman. And then I met a man, and now I'm married to a man. So I arrive at Lloyd's, and then I've got this, bisexual label. I did not go out seeking all of these labels throughout my life. But anyway, there I was. And then I got asked if I would put myself up for the Outstanding Awards, the annual Outstanding Awards that were with the Financial Times at that time there. I think they're with Yahoo Finance or someone different now. But I was asked, would I please put myself forward? First bisexual out CEO. We'd love for you to be there. And I said, absolutely no way, because there I was. I just arrived at Lloyd's. I was off to Dubai to open an office. This was with the Financial Times, and all the business people read the FT. I thought, no, I didn't have the courage. But a year later, when I realized the state of the market and how much work needed to be done to change attitudes, that's when I said, okay, I'll do it. And I wasn't expecting to come as number one on the list, but I did come as number one. And actually, there were I did have, some nasty comments made to me, but from a business perspective, of course, sometimes you don't know the things you lost out on. So I don't know whether in any way Lloyd suffered because I did that. And there were some people who felt this was a bad thing, so therefore they didn't support Lloyd's or whatever. You don't actually know some of those lost opportunities, but I do know that Lloyd's was still very successful, and that we managed to get the modernization and all the technology in because we were hiring different people who were feeling comfortable to be themselves. And we were successful. And I feel really quite pleased when I look back on Lloyd's that I did leave a much more diverse marketplace that had technology embedded in it. The paper had gone and enabled them to go home and work from their offices when the pandemic struck, so they could all trade electronically. So I look back, mixed emotions, if you like, because it was a really tough 5 years, and I wouldn't want to wish that on anyone, but we did achieve a lot. But it does take courage, and I would urge all of you, whatever role you're playing, wherever, you can have an impact. You don't have to be the CEO. You could, just as an individual, you can be a role model. You can speak up for someone if you see something inappropriate happening, or some nasty words or banter happening. Speak up for others. There's all sorts of stuff. And the important thing is, of course, to be curious and want to listen to other people. Because so often we cut ourselves off from others. Goodness me, how many things I've cancelled in my life, Twitter feeds and all of this. I don't want to hear them. But it's not good, is it? We have to have some debate. And it's up to us as individuals to, I think, to continue to have those conversations, be curious, and particularly listen to people who are different to us and try and understand where they're coming from. And I think then together, we can definitely make the world of work much more inclusive and society more generally. So thank you very much for listening. And now I hope we have some questions. Thank you.
Got a couple minutes for questions, if folks have something. If not, I can get us started.
Or a statement. I was going to say, or a comment or anything.
I have a question. Oh, we have it?
Hello, I'm Dan from Salesforce. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. You really talked about like the moral imperative for D&I. How did you see it showing up from a business point of view?
Yeah, and this is when I sort of said, I was trying to work out when I arrived at Lloyd's why no one hadn't been modernized. And I thought there's got to be something to this that, why is there this wall of resistance? And to me, there were two things. One is there weren't enough mass of different people to challenge because the environment didn't allow them to stay. So, the person who comes in, it's their first job. They don't come in with green punk hair these days, but they come in, but they've certainly got a mobile device in their hand and they live their world on their mobile device. But they arrived in Lloyd's and within 6 to 12 months, they were old before their time. They'd conformed and they'd been cloned into these people. So no difference was tolerated. And if you were different and you didn't want to be a clone, you left. So we couldn't get these new ideas and new people coming in. But the other big thing I realized when I started to talk to people in the market, and actually through my central team, we talked to thousands. Why didn't you want to change? Surely technology is the right thing. They just hadn't been involved. And previously, the top management had just forced things down. This is how you're going to do it. This is the tool. Here you go. And I realized we needed to turn it on its head and give power to the people. So I said, okay, we're going to do this completely differently. You are going to design your future. And there are 30,000 people in London alone that work in the market. So never mind if you go elsewhere. So there's a lot of people. And I did need extra time with my board because they hired me. And I said, I need another 3 months. You don't have 3 months and you've got to get going. And I said, no, I need to do this so differently. I need to turn it on its head. I need to give the power to the people, and they are going to be designing and driving the future. And my board eventually supported me in that and said, okay, took a bit of extra time, but because we did that effort at the beginning, and it was a really iterative thing, we were always launching something, checking in with them, changing it, and they were all involved. We actually managed to deliver in time, ahead of time sometimes on some of our modules, and within budget, because you get that momentum of support. So again, I didn't go in with that idea, it was just through the conversation. So that was when I realized that including people is way more important almost than the tech. The tech was the easy bit. God, we had a choice of all sorts of technology. It was getting the people involved. And so that was a very important part. And that was why it became a business imperative just alongside the technology.
Thank you.
We'll come to you after.
Hi, thanks very much for the ultra inspiring talk. I wanted to ask you, you've clearly been able to bring yourself to your work, and you've talked about lots of people who are not able to do that. What's the difference? How do you persuade those people who end up becoming stale male suits in Lloyd's to be themselves and be a bit less stale or a bit less male?
Well, it's interesting, and it takes time. So this deep-rooted culture change is not quick. And I made some mistakes, and so you have to be a bit wise. So for instance, I remember I'd only been there a few months, and I suppose about 6 months, and it was going to be a really, really hot Friday. And I thought, oh gosh, well, I know what, we'll relax the dress code. Here I am, I just come in, and I'm not a guy, I don't have to wear a suit and tie. I just thought, this is easy, well, relax the dress code. And I spoke to all the security people on the Thursday night. I said, cover up all the signs, put the big posters up at the doors, because there are about 5 doors that you can enter Lloyd's with. Big signs, dress code relaxed today. By 9:30 on that Friday, I had a revolution on my hands. Again, all these guys calling for me to be fired. And I thought I was doing them a favor. Got that one wrong, because they were absolutely shocked that I was daring to take away this tradition that had been alive for so long. So I thought, okay, I'll just park that one. And so I just sort of parked that. Now, so I worked on lots of other stuff. And then 3 years down the track, maybe 3.5 years down the track, I started to spot the CEOs in the market, because it's a market. There are all these companies, some of them listed, some of them FTSE 100s actually. So the CEOs are pretty important people. And I found some CEOs that I thought, oh, you're a little bit more receptive to my ideas. And I noticed that some of them, if I had meetings with them in their office, they didn't wear a tie. And I thought, So I started chatting to some of them, and I said, look, this dress code thing, how about you get some of your guys to come into Lloyd's without a tie on? And they said, yes, we'll do it. So I sort of had this, it was like a guerrilla warfare kind of approach, And I managed to get these little groups of people. And that was the way you had to do it. You had to think really differently about how you could change things. And then what happened? So we had all these groups of brave guys. I think they sort of walked in together, really, so they weren't going to be mobbed, and they came in without their ties. And then you have this extraordinary thing, and it was nothing to do with age. It wasn't like the older folk who'd been there many years were worse. Some of these young people, they put up signs on their boxes because Lloyd's trading room had all these, they're called boxes, old term, all these wooden desks where people sit. And so they set up like a little market stall. So you'd have a syndicate at their little market stall, at their box. And some of them would put signs up. Any broker who comes up to my box without a tie, I'm going to charge you 10% more. That's what happened. Amazing, isn't it? Now, that didn't last long because, of course, that's not the right thing. And the regulator gets on top of you and all the rest of it. But it's amazing the response. But you have to be sort of so careful and clever sometimes because it is such a difficult thing to change culture. And my CFO at the time, he was really not into this. A Welsh rugby playing guy, he would say things like, "Oh, Inga, what, you want me to start learning to crochet now?" I said, "No, that's not the point, but we've got to have diverse people." And it's when, and then a year later, I said, "Oh," and it was part of our Dive-In festival, our celebration of diversity and inclusion. We had an event down in Kent in one of the offices. We had Gareth Thomas, the gay Welsh rugby player, speaking about his experience. So I said to my CFO, I said, "Oh, would you go and host that event?" And he said, "Oh, okay." So off he goes. He sits through Gareth's talk and he came back to London to me and he said, "Inga, this was amazing." He said, "I was in tears listening to his story. Now I get what you're talking about. I really understand." He then hired the most diverse team out of any of my direct reports. And it was something about, I didn't give up. I didn't get angry with him. I just thought there's got to be another way. You've got to really persevere at this. And I know sometimes we say, "Well, we don't have time for that." And to be honest, on the gender equality, I've run out of patience. So I say, we've got to have targets and quotas. I'm so sick of it. I'm not seeing any difference. So sometimes you do lose patience, but a lot of it, when you're really in a massive organization trying to drive this change, you just persevere and try and think of new ways. And in fact, one of the things we also did, we had a senior group of LGBT executives across the insurance market. And we used to meet for supper. And then we started to invite some people, different people along, include them in, have conversations. And then I said, "Look," I said, "we're not really making that much progress." So I said, "The next dinner, I'll host it at Lloyd's. You need to go and find the most homophobic person in your company and invite them to dinner with a bunch of gays." And they all said, "Oh, Inga, no." Anyway, so I said, "Right, I'm going to do it." So I searched and I found this guy and I approached him. I said, "Look, I really don't think you're bought into this. I don't know whether you're homophobic, but to me, everything that you do and say smacks of being a little anti." So I said, "Would you come and join a bunch of gays for dinner?" And he said, "Okay." So then I told the rest of these market executives, I said, "I've got one." And then they all managed to find one. And we had dinner, 12 gays, 12 homophobes or whatever. I don't know whether they were, but and I'm exaggerating a bit. But we had a conversation over dinner. Now, that was after some while, and that was when I had the confidence to sort of go out and really challenge and have conversations. And sometimes you need to do that, but you've got to kind of manage it. I learned not to be a bull in a china shop, even though I'm a tourist. And so you have to be a bit smart about it. Yeah. Okay, I think we've just got time for one more question. I know you had your hand up here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sagi from Business School in Madrid. You kind of, I think, answered the question with the last answer. I wanted to ask about, you talked about diversity and inclusion. I think it also has a lot to do with religious people from from different backgrounds that are more traditional in their point of view. So especially as a boss for a person from this background, how do you think we should handle without fear of losing respect with coming out in the workplace?
I know, and I do come back to this point about having these open conversations, because I remember I used to blog when I arrived at Lloyd's. I thought this will be my last CEO position, and I'm going to do a weekly blog so that I have, for the first 100 days anyway, so I have a history if I ever want to write a book about it, I don't know what I'll do, but I'll want to do this blog. And it was my own words. Every Friday I'd write it, not my corporate comms team, all my words. And it got very popular. And it was so popular, I did it for the 5 years I was there. Not at the latter stages, it wasn't every week, but I kept it going all the time. So people then started to do the same, and we started to have very open conversations. And there, one week, this blog got more hits and likes and comments than mine did. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go and speak to this guy. Anyway, what he blogged about was Ramadan. And I went up to him, I found his desk, I went up to him and I said, fantastic. First of all, you sort of, what the hell's the CEO coming for? But I said, fantastic, congratulations, you blogged about Ramadan. And look at the interest from people who in the past would never, ever, ever have asked you about it. They'd be too embarrassed. Well, will I say the wrong thing? It's just like LGBT. I mean, people are still afraid of getting the acronym wrong, and they do. And do we really care? We shouldn't care, right? We shouldn't get hung up about it. But people were nervous. He opened up this conversation and I said, this is fantastic. And he said, yes, do you know what? In my previous company, he said, I joined Lloyd's because of what you were driving. He said, in my previous company, I wasn't allowed to mention my religion. I wasn't allowed to talk about it. It was an American-owned company, by the way. I don't know whether I shouldn't say that. I'm sure that just happens to be this one company. But they weren't allowed to talk about it. And here were we, openly talking about these things. And that meant you can start having conversations with somebody about, well, why don't you accept gays? And if you don't start having these open conversations from all sorts of angles, you can't understand and even provide a safe environment for people to be out. And I know it can still take courage to be out, but my urge in all of this is to have conversations and start just understanding people's differences. And if you can do it in facilitated conversations, so much the better, which is why I think the ERGs can be so helpful. And we started to do ERG connections. So you'd get people from the different ERGs together talking about the topics that are relevant for their group. So you've got the religion focused group talking to the LGBT group and really trying to be empathetic about it. And that's what I think is the heart to this. And instead of cancelling everything out that's not agreeing with us, that's the way to do it. Okay, well, thank you all very, very much. Thanks for inviting me and organising it. Thank you.